Good afternoon and welcome to Between Two Teapots. We're here today with Suzette Hammond, Being Tea. How are you?
Hi, doing well. Thanks for having me.
So I see you have a gaiwan on the table. Are we gonna be doing a gaiwan or teapots? What's the plan for today?
Yeah, usually, for me, I brew a lot in the Gaiwan. That's just kind of my preference. I do have some small clay pots, but I just kind of like my default is to go with the Gaiwan,
Gaiwan's the
especially
go-to.
yeah, especially when it's something that like a tea I might not be familiar with. I want to like get up close to it.
Well, this is what I'm gonna be brewing with. I got this little it's cutie little teapot here. We got
Oh.
the fisheye lens for the win. I like the fisheye lens. Lets me get up close and stuff. And so I figured we'd start with the Honeybomb. We'll do with the shou first. You've got both
Sure.
there. I sent right. Yeah. So
Mhm.
awesome. So you're in Chicago. Is that it? You're a
Yes.
Chicagoan. Nice. Yeah. Cool. Well, tell people a little bit about yourself while we get the tea started. And if
Oh,
anybody
thank you,
says
thank you.
has anything in chat to ask, jump in and I'll make sure get started with that.
Yeah. So let's see. I've been in Chicago for hmm, going on 11 years this year.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I've kind of lived all over the US, but I've been here for the longest for quite a long time, so that's cool. And my work is in tea education. So I do teachings and trainings, now all online, but primarily before in the before times, most of that was in person and on the road, but now it's all online. And I had been teaching online already actually before all of this. So that was extremely helpful because it wasn't as big of a transition for me in some ways. So that was cool. But yeah, so that's me. I don't sell tea. I don't have a tea company. I am just focused on education.
And yeah, so we've met and had tea together briefly over
Mhm.
the years at the Northwest Tea Festival.
Yeah,
We usually get to see you once a year at the booth. You'll stop in for a little bit and have some
get
tea
some
with us. But
teas.
but
Yeah,
you've always been teaching classes and stuff at the Northwest Tea Festival, and you teach classes at the Portland Tea Festival as well, right? And
yeah. Like I've been making the I guess the rounds on the circuit for
yeah,
quite a long time. Like the Seattle show is the one I've been teaching at the longest. I think with only missing, not counting the pandemic, obviously. Um, but I've missed I think maybe one or two festivals over the years if I was sick or something like that.
okay.
But otherwise, I've taught every single year there. I started teaching at the Portland show, Midwest show, the one in New York, Chicago show, Chicago online show last year. So yeah, like that's a big part of my travel work is going to the
It's a little
festivals.
easier to go to a lot of festivals if you don't have an entire truck full of tea to sell
It certainly is, or tea
or
ware,
tea
like the
ware.
folks who set up
It's so
the wood
impressive.
fire ceramics at the
So
Seattle
impressive
show.
seeing
Oh my
those. Yeah.
god, yeah, that truly takes a village for that kind of effort.
So I'm going to show off the cake here. So this is honey bomb. It kind of looks like camouflage. I really kind of like the way all the big leaves and stuff fold into it. So this is a Jingmai blend. It's a blend of Jingmai materials, which has a higher concentration of Huangpian material in it. So makes it a little bit more affordable. There you go. You got the Neife. I tossed
I
that in so that you
know. I
there
was
you
like,
go.
ooh, cool. I get the magical.
Oh, nice. Oh, you can. Oh, you've got multiple cameras going up there. Look at that. Nice.
I do.
You've got a pretty fancy setup you've worked out over there. I like it.
Yeah.
So what is your?
Yeah. So,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, like when you know, let's see, I started teaching online regularly as a portion of, my main work in 2017,
Okay.
and so the room that I'm in now is the room that it's my office, tea workspace. And so this room has had to serve a lot of purposes over the years relating to tea. Like if I'm getting ready to travel somewhere, I got luggage out everywhere, packing teaware and
Yeah.
all the stuff. And so when I was teaching online, it had to be a setup that I could break down really quickly. to make room
Yeah.
if I'm just teaching a little bit throughout the month. And then now that it's full time, like this whole
This is your
setup
space.
is it's very planted here. It's very gonna stay put.
It's the same way,
Which is
with
nice.
our little setup here. I mean, I've got like a
Bubble.
monitor set up and camera, but this is where I'd actually be doing tea tastings with people, and so I wouldn't be able to have that set up like that. So it's relatively modular and movable, but I just it's just you just
like
don't,
I could
you
move
just don't want to.
some elements of this. Yeah, I can move it if I need to, but I don't want to.
Yeah, you kind of get used to it.
There's something about having stability, especially right now, that's really really nice.
So what is your tea to leaf, or your water to leaf ratio? What do you go for a tea like this?
I tend to so I guess I'll say I don't really overthink it too much. If I'm evaluating the tea, I'll weigh it and make sure it's nice and consistent. But I tend to, in this size little guy one or in a pot about this big, I tend to like just starting at 5 grams, something like that.
Okay.
And then go from there. Yeah, it's not something that I have cataloged dozens of results and see where they come out.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
1 to 15 is roughly my ratio. That's kind of what I'm going for. But I do find that oftentimes with pu'er, I end up overleafing it. I just end up putting a little bit more in just for fun. And so this pot here is this is actually a relatively small pot. This pot's maybe only like 80, 85, 90, somewhere around there. And I probably put in 1 to 10 or something like that. But Huang Pian's generally, you can kind of push it a little bit. You can kind of get it going a little bit more. So it's it can handle a beating. Use boiling for pu'er, or what do you generally do?
Pretty close. So I'll say that my pu'er generally, I don't. I'm not somebody who, especially at this point in my life, that I drink really really strong tea.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's why starting with something like just 5 grams in like a little handful size teapot is, base where I'm doing. I tend to steep it pretty light.
Yeah.
So like we've got pretty light color here, right?
Yeah.
And just see where that goes, see where that edge is, and kind of how it opens up and everything like that. So I tend to go on the lighter side.
Okay.
When I was younger, I went for something that was a lot stronger, really bracing, super, almost like kind of whiskey sort of feeling. And it's not my energy anymore.
it's not your cup of tea. You can say it.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. Like
it's funny when I use that phrase because it's just something nobody ever uses for tea. And Lam was always like, "Why do people laugh when you say that all the time?" I'm like, well, because nobody ever says it for tea. It's just
nobody ever actually says it for that. Yeah, literally for that.
So it's cool. We're gonna approach this tea from both sides. You're approaching it from the lighter side, and I'm gonna approach it from the stronger side. We'll kind of meet in the middle. Yeah. I am gonna be drinking it in this fancy silver cup here, which always makes things look really pretty.
Those
I
so
do.
Nice.
I do. CrimsonLotusTea.com. What is your cup there that you've got?
Oh, this little friend?
Mm-hmm.
So this little one, let's see. I think I got this also in Seattle. This is from like the Wood Fire Collective that comes up from Oregon.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I love this cup. I love the that orange on the inside and how it just kind of makes everything glow. And it's got that sparkly, crackly on the inside. It looks
so well used.
Yeah, like
well loved.
It is a loved cup. I really dig this little friend.
Nice.
Mm-mm-mm.
Let's see. So how's the weather in Chicago? You fall into spring these days?
We are finally. Yeah, it's let's see, just this week starting to get like low 70s, mid 70s. Got the window open here, so if anything happens outside and it catches on the microphone, I'm not responsible for it.
Yeah, I had to. Well, we've got kids are at Grandma's house. Grandma's house is next door, so we shouldn't hear any screaming kids. And I've got most of the windows closed, which makes it a little bit warmer in here right now. Nobody in Seattle has air conditioning. I don't know if you know that, but like nobody in Seattle uses air conditioning.
Oh yes. I used to live in Portland, and that was a struggle because I moved. We moved to Portland from Las Vegas, which of course, like I think by law has to have air conditioning.
Yeah.
So that was a shock. Like it is humid and it gets hot.
How long did you live in Portland?
Almost 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that when you were in the tea biz?
It's when I first started. So this was in 2003.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So there was still well, yeah. Well, the Pacific Northwest has always had tea people and tea things and stuff like that. So it's a really good place to do tea things.
Yeah, I remember like going to the this location's closed now, but one of the locations for the Dao of Tea.
Yeah.
Pick up on Northwest 23rd or something like that. It was just this. There was the one that had the little small Japanese tea room inside. I used to love that location. I basically lived there.
I'm trying to remember. I've been to a handful of tea places there over the years. I'm trying to remember. You know, it's funny. It's one of those. It's, you know, Portland is like so close to Seattle, but like I still hardly ever get there. But I mean, it's so
same.
Close. So close.
Same. When I lived there, I think we got to Seattle just once or twice, maybe.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
I mean, realistically,
like one of them being the first year of the festival, I think, or something.
You know, if you're ambitious, you could do the drive in like 2.5 hours. Like, I mean, it's not far at all. And but I still it really enjoy getting down to Portland, and it still has like the feel of like, ooh, it's like a whole different city. When realistically, Seattle and Portland are largely very similar, very similar people, very similar.
Of one of the other.
Yeah, they're very similar cities. But that's cool. No, I didn't realize you lived in the Pacific Northwest.
Right, and that was kind of the connection for wanting to teach at the Seattle show and kind of coming back every year. Yeah, that's where that came from. That was my first long-term relationship with a show like that. Not counting World Tea Expo, you know, something that was just more for the tea community.
Yeah.
And I just kept coming back. I really love that show. It's hands down like somebody, if they're looking for a place to experience tea or to just kind of soak up all there is to offer, that's my first suggestion, is going to
the Northwest Tea Festival.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had Doug and Julie on a live stream a couple weeks ago, which was that was a lot of fun. You know, I think people don't really realize what all goes on, you know, to actually create an event like that, and it's
truly
super blessed that we've like got it in our backyard. You know, the fact that I can, you know, pack up my brother's truck and, you know, like drive down there on a Friday and set things up and not have to worry about shipping things and moving stuff around. I'm super impressed with the people that actually do that. The companies that actually go to like every single festival. And we've gotten a lot more efficient over the years with like our booth set up and, you know, like knowing like what to bring and not bringing everything that we have. It's and we could probably do it. We could probably, you know, swing it, you know, doing a different festival and stuff, but it's just adds so much extra stress.
Yeah. So you don't think that you would do another show in another city like that?
Well, I guess right now with like kids and stuff, it would be hard. If we could, you know, kind of do like a Crimson Lotus on the road type thing where, you know, like we kind of like made it like a road trip and had, you know, like minimum inventory and just kind of went around, focused more on, you know, like tasting and conversations and, you know, like meeting with people and stuff. But if I went to other festivals with like a purely commercial focus, I think it would be a lot more stressful.
It's really hard. Yeah. I mean, it's even hard on my side as in teaching classes, because I bring almost all of my own stuff. The only thing that I generally ask is like if they can provide, you know, thermoses for hot water. And even then, if the show doesn't have it, I have some, I'll bring them. Yeah. So, you know, like last time I taught at the Midwest show, I had 2 enormous cases full of teaware. Like I brought everything. It was, it's a lot. It's a lot to take some stuff on the road, you know, and I think again, like you said, people don't realize just how much goes into all of that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if our first year we just brought like just way too much. It was like we were the last ones to set up, and you know, we were the last ones to tear down, and like Doug's standing there like, guys, we're closing the doors, and I'm like, I just didn't. But we've gotten a lot more efficient with it over the years and stuff like that. But it's and you really have to be. You've got to.
You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, and it would even like affect the type of topics that I teach, which
Okay.
I could talk a little bit more about that too. But so for example, if I'm teaching at a show where, most of the time I'm teaching multiple classes, otherwise there's really not, for me to fly across the country to teach one class is kind of not, so I'll teach multiple classes. I'll bring my teaware with me, but I have to, it's kind of like this puzzle where I have to make sure that whatever I'm teaching will go with whatever teaware I'm bringing, right? So that might mean I can't teach a class, like say working with gaiwans, because if I'm only bringing half a dozen gaiwan for that one class, it just doesn't really work, right? I have to figure out some other way that I would use them for another class too, because it's just so much to carry. And so that's interesting because that's, what I often teach on the road is a little bit different than what I teach, just in my own program, in my own community, where things can be a little bit more creative, a little bit more freeform. And
why don't you tell us about what you teach? Tell us about your classes and what you offer.
Yeah, so I basically, the type of tea education I do at this point for me is very very experiential, very just self-guided exploration, non-linear, so people can take a class basically in any order. I've worked for a lot of companies and organizations where we developed this content that was very like start here and then here and here and here, and at the end you get a certification or something. And I don't teach that way anymore. I really believe in the wandering path, the circles of how we learn about tea, And so, I teach things like learning to taste. I teach cupping classes, vocabulary exploration, where we're exploring by tasting and drinking different things and finding that in our tea. Brewing classes where we're just learning how to kind of dismantle maybe some of these rules that we pick up and play with them a little bit, and to learn how to brew more intuitively. And then I also teach a lot around what I see is the other side of that, which is tea for contemplative practice. So tea is meditation. Tea is something that is as a way of tapping into our creative self, our well-being. And that's also something that, when I was working for tea companies, I didn't get to explore that very much. Like that was my own practice, but I didn't get to teach it because, when you work for a brand, you represent the brand. And if that isn't kind of in line with what their mission is, or, what they're doing, you don't get to really talk about that. And so I really appreciated just kind of being free of that and being like, I can do whatever wild stuff we want to do here now. So yeah, like I teach very kind of personal classes now, which is really different than,
Is it primarily one-on-one or one on a few, or how do you do it?
A lot of it is it's in groups. Okay. So I teach live group classes, and I also have recordings that folks can watch. I do teach private lessons if, when folks request them. That's really fun. Because I know in my, time in learning tea, I really benefited from one-on-one people working with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also offer teacher training too. And the teacher training community is also a combination of group and one-on-one work with people.
So the teacher training is you teaching people how to teach about tea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Because that's also something too, where we have a lot of structure in the industry for, I think, what people consider the knowledge that you need to know, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of purposes, like for running businesses and marketing and things like that. We don't have structure for what are we supposed to do with that. If you want to get involved in education, for example, how do you actually teach that? What is it that you're doing when you're creating something? And so this program is learning about taking what you already know with tea, but looking at it through the lens of education. How would you actually share that with people?
Okay.
Which is something that I'm really passionate about, because I think that leading tastings is different than offering a class, like offering that kind of structure where you're holding that space for people to be able to explore that.
Yeah, I think I probably took for granted like a lot of the tea education that we got, because it was just in in tea houses and tea shops in Yunnan, just on the ground, just like talking with people and things, and just it's hard. It's easy to forget that like not everybody has that capacity, but we certainly recognize like early on that especially around pu'er tea. We got started 2013-ish. So I mean, people in North America knew what pu'er tea was, but they only knew it from like Dr. Oz or some like weight loss, super health thing or something. We had a lot of re-education to do. I mean, so we realized early on that like we couldn't just sell tea. We had to become educators at some level, even if just to show people what pu'er tea like really was, and that it wasn't just some dirty, fishy, like lake bed tea or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would say maybe half the people who are in that program with me are folks who have a business selling tea.
Okay.
A small business themselves, so they're in that position where they're realizing they enjoy educating, but they would like to do more with that.
Yeah. I actually find
it is something that's really, really important, I think.
Yeah, I think I find that I do enjoy the educational aspect of it. Probably because I love learning myself, and so I'm passionate about learning new things. Then if I learn something new that I think is exciting, then I'm excited to share it with somebody else who's also like passionate about it. But we found there was just so much misinformation about pu'er tea, and so much just people just didn't know, or they knew the wrong things, and then because I'm not entirely sure how that all came about. Probably just poor quality like tea coming into America, and people not knowing what it is, and then saying that that's just what it's supposed to be, and then it didn't match up with like the experiences that I had with pu'er tea, like in China and stuff, and so we had to. It's actually like the markets and stuff in China are super awesome from an educational perspective, because everyone's so open about just going down and sitting in a tea shop, and they'll bring out different stuff and they'll talk about it. You can ask questions, and maybe it's a little easier for a foreigner to ask questions because they just assume I don't know anything anyways. I don't know if it would be
definitely.
But
I think, like you say, that's a form of education that we definitely take for granted, because so I spent a lot of time in the headspace of looking at specifically like adult education and where some of these systems and structures come from. And in this model that we grew up in, this model that's very like Eurocentric structure, right? Where you go to school for a certain number of years, and there's curriculum, and then you get to a certain level, and then you keep going with that, right?
Yeah.
And that there is specific things that you're supposed to learn along the way. That's just the way that we approach so much, right? We see these parallels in early education, we see them in university, we see them in our training programs as an adult. Like the entire time that I've worked in tea, I've worked in training and education. So that is like fully what I've done for almost 20 years now. And when we compare that to like these very old ways of learning, right? Where it's just tasting it. Right? It's tasting and asking questions and being curious and seeing cycles and patterns repeat themselves. How you could go to all these tea shops and start to notice some similarities. And if you go enough, you'll see similarities between the tea now versus how was it last year? What is it like typically this time of year? And over time, we start to stitch together this very embodied understanding. And that's very important, and that is real education. And it's very easy to overlook that and say, well, it wasn't taught by anybody.
Right.
It wasn't in a class. I didn't get a certificate at the end. But that's actually how people learn something like this. That's how the people who make your tea, that's how they learn it. Tasting and doing.
It's similar to I remember maybe I was watching a documentary on forging and counterfeiting currency, right? And the way that they train people to detect forged or counterfeited money is they just spend a bunch of time with the real thing. I mean, like they make them like sit in a room for hours and hours and hours, weeks, just with like a dollar bill. Instead of like sitting them in a classroom, like this is how people forge and this is how people forge, they make them sit down with the actual source until it's so absolutely deeply ingrained that like as soon as they see something that isn't
really
it, then they absolutely know that. And I think that's
that's really brilliant.
Something that the tea markets in China have down. I mean, people sit there like, and they just like their entire lives, and they sit down there and they're just drinking and drinking and drinking like the absolute highest quality stuff. That as soon as like something comes down, they're like, wait a minute, like this tea's not right. I mean, it's just so absolutely obvious. They've never actually had to sit in some classroom and learn like things about it. But that's interesting. You got to sit there and
absolutely. Like, and I would get, I mean, and it's not just me too, it's a lot of folks who work in education, like on a larger industry level where, you know, we get questions from students all the time who like, what can I do to learn more? What books can I read? Right. Meaning they want something that is the official source of the information.
Yeah.
Right. And the answer is always the same. It's just drink more tea, taste more tea, keep doing that. Yeah. And then sometimes you get folks with this, like, some people will be happy with that answer. They're like, oh, great. I mean, you've just validated this thing that they really want to believe is true, but they're not sure. And then other folks will get this kind of sad look like, you know, like that's not the answer they wanted.
People learn.
I'm telling you the most, like, that you get to just drink more tea. That's like the happiest answer possible.
Well, we see, you know, I see something similar when you know, like we'll be at the tea festival and somebody will come down and they're like, hey, I want to start drinking pu'er tea. Like, what should I buy? And then I'll ask them questions like, well, you know, like what types of tea do you like to drink? You like what flavors? And like they don't know. Like they literally just want somebody to tell them like, this is what I need. Yeah. This is what I need to buy, you know? And so sometimes they don't want that choice. And some people actually excel at like book learning, like sitting down in front of a book. I was never somebody like that. I always had to be like hands-on. I was always a learn by doer. So, but there are enough, you know, tea book resources out there that actually, I mean, people can find that and have that if they want to. But I agree with you. You gotta sit down.
Replace tasting it. Yeah.
You gotta sit down. You gotta learn. You gotta pay the tuition. You gotta drink some bad teas to find out why good teas are good teas. I mean, but I mean, speaking of tea books, what are some tea books that you actually do enjoy yourself?
The one that I read the most recently that I really enjoy. Let me see. I don't want to mess up the title, so I'm just gonna look here. I really enjoyed Tasting Qualities by Sarah Beskey.
Okay.
It's about looking at the history of tea specifically in Assam, but it also deals with like Darjeeling and the colonial past of that and how that affects the marketplace today. I found a lot of really helpful parallels for that in teaching. So that's one it's definitely on my recommended reading list for anybody who not just interested in tea, but if you're interested in tea professionally, to just understand the context for even it's a specific area of the marketplace, but it has ripple effects throughout the rest of everything else too. So I really appreciated that. That was a good one.
Have you traveled internationally to tea places? Have you had the chance to check stuff out? Where have you gone?
Yeah. Let's see. Kind of been all over China, Vietnam, Nepal, Korea. Let's see. I feel like I'm missing somewhere else. Taiwan.
That's pretty
Turkey,
cool.
Actually, yeah.
Do they grow much tea in Turkey? I know they consume
they do,
it.
Yeah.
So they actually grow it. Okay.
Yeah, they do grow some.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by how diverse the climates can be where people actually do produce tea effectively. And it's also this funny thing where it's the same thing with like Seattle coffee. You know, it's like there's no coffee that grows here, but still Seattle has a name for coffee. And you find other places like British tea, when British tea actually isn't from Britain. Although ironically now you actually do grow tea in Britain, so there actually is British tea now.
I know, right? For the first time now, they would actually say there is.
It's actually British tea.
It's really quite good too.
I know, and it's actually ironically somewhat popular in China, which is just absolutely hilarious given the full circular nature of that history. But no, it's just interesting to see, or it's exciting for me to see when places that like Turkey. I didn't realize Turkey actually produced tea, and so you know you get people talking about you know, like British tea or Turkish tea or something, but when it actually is physically from there, it's like, oh, that's cool. It's like, I argue with people about, actually, people really don't like me arguing about it. I'll argue on like Reddit or on like some online group and like in like some like Seattle subreddit or something where somebody's just like, hey, you know, like I want to get something that's typical Seattle to give as a gift to my friend, and somebody's always like coffee, and I'm like, did it actually grow here? You know, and then I'm like, why is coffee so typically Seattle when it like it's from some foreign country, but it's brought here, and then somebody like adds heat to it, and it becomes like a Seattle product. But people don't like me, making those arguments.
The reality of that, yeah.
We did have some. We were trying to get into like the local like farmers market scene, like the Pacific Northwest has such a great like farmers market, you know, like setup and things like that, and they were super excited about it. Like every single time I would message them, like, oh, that's great. You know, like, oh, you know, like we're so excited, you know, like, yeah, it'd be great to, you know, like get some tea represented and things. And then they come to the conversation of like, oh, wait, where's your tea from? Like, well, you know, like we get it from China. And they're like,
oh, right. Yeah.
You know, like we only deal with, you know, like local products. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, so why are all these people selling coffee here? And they're like, well, they're just, I'm like, that coffee is not grown here. There's no farmer in Seattle that grew that coffee. And then they kind of get a little upset at that point in time. And then like,
you realize like this game of localizing things doesn't really quite work. Yeah. And so I just find that a little funny. So that's awesome that I didn't realize, like I said, I didn't realize Turkey was I mean, I kind of like the concept. I think years ago somebody mentioned well, I'm going to mess it up, but it's kind of like a concept around thinking locally.
Yeah.
You know, so whereas like, say for you guys, like you're a tea company that specializes in tea from a very, very specific area, right? Yeah. So, you know, in a way, like, and you have these very close relationships with people personally who produce the tea.
Yeah.
So that's it in its form. That's local, right? Like that's direct. That's what the benefit of that whole relationship is.
Yeah.
And so I wish more places would be open to considering.
Yeah, I mean, I get why they don't.
What that means.
You know, they've got to have their set rules and stuff, and they start bending it.
But if they're gonna have coffee there, then
if they're gonna have coffee, they better have tea. And I think I probably could have worked it into like I'm making the tea here angle, as opposed to this is a product that I'm selling here, and so using that as the way to shoehorn in. But like they started getting really like not into it, and then it was just like it would be just too much work to kind of convince them and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean it's hard. I mean, like specifically for something like pu'er tea, like it is absolutely a bioregional product. Like there will never be any Seattle pu'er tea, like ever, just by the definition of it. You can't have it. But yeah, it's interesting. I agree with you. They should have been a little bit more open, but whatever.
Well, also too, when you consider, I think in some farmers markets, people sell blends that they make, and so it's the idea, well, it's made here. It's like, yes, but those ingredients were sourced from all over. Right? Yeah. So it's not a local product.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the finer details of that is a little hard, I think, for organizers to wrap their heads around.
Yeah. You know? Well, even like somebody that was making like clothes and stuff like that, you know, like was like the cotton actually made here? Like how low down do you actually want to go? At what point in time does you know the craft of making it make it, you know, like a product from that area? It's just an interesting I don't know. Yeah. It's just something when just to kind of be annoying, I will poke people about it on Reddit or something sometimes, but I'm used to getting downvoted on Reddit, so it doesn't matter. I might as well have some fun on it, right? It's just Reddit, right?
I like places that have, you know, where it's makes it more about supporting the small business, like the local business too. Yeah, that's I think nice. That's a very inclusive way of being able to do that.
That makes sense. I like that. I like that too. So. Do you have any thoughts on this tea? Did you get a chance to try it before today, or is this your?
I did not.
Your first crack right there.
Yeah. Well, I totally overleafed it. The little chunk was a little bit more condensed than I thought it would be, and so I overleafed it. So mine's definitely strong.
It just makes makes the session stretch out when you got those like little tough little nugs. Just Yeah, so this is one that we put together last year. We weren't, one of the difficulties of, existing as an international business in the global pandemic is it makes it really hard to source local. So we actually didn't get the chance to go to Yunnan last year. So it meant that like a lot of our teas were released a little bit later. I like to have like my own hands, in the creative process of, like blending and stuff like that. So it meant that we kind of had to having like stuff shipped here so I could kind of get final control and say on things and stuff. But then shipping was horrible.
Wow.
But this is one that actually worked out. It was just kind of an idea that I had to. Jingmai has such a nice honey essence, and the honey essence in this kind of like comes and goes depending on like the age of it and stuff like this. But that was the goal with it, was to try and kind of work through some of the different producers of Jingmai teas we knew that had like where their trees and teas kind of had more of like a honey essence, and so just kind of put that all into one. Well, it's actually relatively affordable tea because it's got a lot of huangpian material in it. But
do you think if this situation that happened in the last year with the pandemic, do you think if this had occurred earlier in your time as a tea company, that would have been just extremely difficult to handle because you're so used to a kind of a specific way of operating?
Possibly.
And to have that just be completely taken away from you. Like if this had happened, say like in your second or your third year, what do you think that would have?
I think that would have been a much more significant hiccup. Thankfully, I mean, Lemo and I are pretty flexible, and we're pretty focused on like finding a way to make this business work, whatever it takes. So I think we'd probably have found a way to work through it. But yeah, no, we've so we've been in this about seven or 8 years now, and so we've maintained and built like a fairly strong connection of relationships with like farmers and pressing factories and things over there, and so that's definitely helped because I'm super focused on quality of our products, and I don't want to let that get sacrificed. And so the fact that I'm still continuing to work with people that I've worked with in the past and verified their quality in the past has certainly helped. And if I didn't have 7 years of experience working with these people, if I only had like 1 or 2, it would have I think we probably might have had to make some sacrifices in quality, or just go a different way or something. But it's definitely been an interesting challenge for anybody. Well, I mean, any business, number one, but if you're dealing with international anything, it's a whole bunch more stuff. So
yeah, what was it like for your suppliers?
Like
some of the folks that you
so Yunnan's pretty remote, right? Yunnan's really far away from
really off the grid.
everything. It's off of every grid, and there were beginnings of cases happening in like the Munghai area and things like that, but there was, I mean, they were at that point in time, by the time that stuff had happened, I mean, Wuhan had already been going through like everything that they were going through, and so it was really easy for them to just implement like super mega strict like everything and get it locked down. And Yunnan hasn't really been significantly affected. So I mean, obviously there were effects and like things like tied to shipping and all sorts of stuff like that, but I think they actually did relatively okay. I think they had more trouble last year with some weather stuff and the overwhelming or the looming fear of this like locust swarm that was supposed to be coming from Africa or over from Africa.
Oh,
up
right.
Through. That was supposed to be.
I do remember that. Yeah.
But it never really landed or coalesced. It never really had the worrying impact on the Yunnan production that they thought it was supposed to have, which is good. But
very good.
yeah, no, it was a drier year again last year, which does two things. I mean, it makes the tea more expensive, but also makes the tea taste better. Or the tea that actually is produced is usually the tea that actually has to work a little bit harder and get out there.
Tea produced under a little bit of stress, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and those are also just the stronger trees, right? So the older trees are the stronger trees, and those are the ones that have learned. I mean, it's not the first year in history where things have been warmer. Like these trees know. I mean, if they've been around like multiple hundreds of years, they know how to stick it out for the long term and stuff. And so it kind of works out. But it definitely does make tea products more expensive. And you do actually also find people trying to slip in lower quality stuff, because they're trying to, just like sell more because they're trying to, make money in difficult years and things. So you kind of have to be a little bit more careful and stuff. It's just a whole bunch of stuff. So
yeah.
But this was a nice little tea. It's nice to have different levels of products, and this one I would definitely put this more onto the daily drinker, more affordable level tea cake. But it's I think it has some good potential for aging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really smoothing out now. I've lost count of how many times I've steeped it, but it's starting to get kind of this more of like plush mouth feel to it that I really enjoy.
Do you age pu'er tea? Do you have a pomodoro? Do you have any special setup in your place for aging
I don't
tea?
have the conditions for it, unfortunately. Yeah, because it's I could get a little separate thing to put it in by just very low on space. Yeah. And it tends to be kind of dry in here. Like I'm looking at my little hygrometer over here, and it's like 45% humidity. So, kind of a little bit more on the dry side in here. And plus the, in Chicago, the temperature fluctuations that we have. You
guys get relatively humid in the summer, right?
Get very humid in the summer and extremely dry in the winter. And so it's a very rad. I mean, it makes keeping plants difficult sometimes.
Right.
Learning, like I think a lot of folks over this last year getting houseplant pets, learning all about houseplants.
Either that or baking bread, right?
Baking bread. For me it was houseplants.
For you it was houseplants. You went that route.
I went that route. I've done the bread thing a little bit before, but for me this time it was houseplants. And so I think I would have to get like a little separate
pomodoro, little fun pomodoro setup. It's fun. There's a lot of people that do really cool like pomodoro level experiments and things like that with like controlling different like humidity and temperature and stuff. But it's tricky. I mean, hey, at least you've got a hygrometer, right? So I mean, you actually know what your base environment is, so you know where to build from. That's usually my first recommendation when people are like, "Hey, how do I store pu'er tea?" And my answer is like, well, I mean, you've got to know what your environment is. Buy a hygrometer, see what the local environment is. And even when people live in hot, humid environments, nobody keeps their house hot and humid, right? I mean, everybody would be having an air conditioner. So it's just and
finding those places inside that were just, I think, good for tea storage in general. So where it's relatively cool and dry, it doesn't fluctuate too much, it's not dusty, it's not smelly, like all that same kind of good stuff. Like I do keep my pu'er in a separate area, but I don't have an aging setup for it just yet. I also don't have a terribly large collection either. All of my, like for the teas that I work with, because I primarily am buying for teaching, so I don't keep things for very long. I do have like a small stash that's just my personal collection, but I also drink through it pretty quickly. So I don't have like an inventory. Like my tea office is literally just this one room.
That's a good point. Yeah. We get that because I get this email like all the time about like how do people store their pu'er tea, and I think people in their mind have this idea that they're going to be aging it for like a really long time, but in reality they're probably just going to be drinking it within a few months. And so if you're going to be drinking it within a few months, it's pretty simple. You just don't want the bad aromas to get in. That's really all you kind of really have to worry about.
Really, competing aromas, dustiness, things like that. Letting it dry out too much, which for me that's kind of primarily the concern with any of my teas, not letting it dry out.
Yeah. So how do you control that?
Well, actually, this little cabinet behind me is hardwood. This is a really nice little sealed cabinet here, and so I have a lot of my teas in here. It maintains pretty even temperature and humidity in here. I've checked it, and nice and clean and dry. Doesn't smell. So tea seems to do pretty well in there. It keeps quite a while.
Good. That's nice.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when people are considering like aging things for super long term, I mean, the way it's done professionally is you just need 10 metric tons of the material. It kind of works
That's
itself
true.
kind of works itself out
Yeah.
over time.
That's very true. That's something else I mentioned to folks too, is really storage, I think is very tricky when you have tiny amounts of tea. You know, I usually advise folks, like, try to drink through, if you have just a small amount of something left, try to drink through those little bits, because there's not enough mass for it to keep itself fresh.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter what it's in at that point.
Yeah.
It's just not enough. Versus, like, if you got a nice little brick or some cakes or something like
Yeah.
that, that's gonna, the mass of that is gonna help do its own
Or
job,
even
right?
like a tong, if it's been bamboo
Right.
wrapped and stuff.
Exactly.
That bamboo wrapped insulation actually works relatively good. So
Yeah, definitely.
good suggestions. Adriana in chat is talking about looking into humidors. You don't know how to choose it. Well, you don't want a humidor, because a humidor is designed for cigars, and they're often aromatically lined, so it'll be made out of like cedar or something like that. Unless you want your tea to taste like cedar, but just make sure it's a conscious choice. But yeah, no, cigars definitely, like the humidors are designed to add aroma, and so probably, you know, like an odor-free, like Rubbermaid style tub, or something that maybe like food grade plastic tub that can actually seal, is probably a good starting point. You can kind of,
That's how quite a few of mine are stored too. Yeah, like I have like some separate tubs in here too, where it's just for that one type.
Or Jugpen says clay jars. Clay jars actually work relatively well if you've got the ability to do bigger jars. Some people, at least in the U.S., they've got, you know, like grandma used to make sauerkraut, and sauerkraut is like made in like big old like crocks. Crocks work great. They're really not that cheap if you're buying new crocks, which is why I suggested, you know, seeing if grandma had some old crocks, because I mean, new crocks in sizes that you would want for a bunch of tea and stuff can be like $50 or $100. It can kind of go.
They can, and they're heavy too. Like, they're very heavy. So if we were going to get it, say, shipped from somewhere, it'd probably be kind of expensive to do that.
I guess the trick is Ace Hardware. I didn't realize like Ace Hardware is like the #1 local seller of crockware.
Stuff for all the home fermenters out there. I used to do the sauerkraut. I like made sauerkraut and kimchi for years. Like that was fermenting stuff, and like kombucha and June and things like that. That was big thing for me for a while.
Or if you have access to a local potter who can, you know, like make stuff for you, that would be the way to go, because then you could have something made to your size and stuff like that, and you're supporting local as well, like we were talking about. But yeah, at a bare minimum, food grade odor neutral plastic sealable container is, you can go a long way with that, and as long as it's full, you really don't have to worry about like adding a lot of humidity to it. You know, keep your hygrometer in there and just kind of watch it. And if it's dropping a lot, you might want to you know, put some Bovita packets in there or something like that. So, but generally, I just tell people not to really stress about it. If you've got several metric tons and you're worried about like creating an investment for 50 years from now, put some stress into it. But
and I get a lot of questions too about what does the tea taste like if it's not good anymore, because I think people are afraid of it, you know, being like scary cheese in the back of the fridge or something. You know, I don't realize like when the tea is just it's not as fresh anymore, or it's just past its prime, that sometimes that could be a bit subtle, and sometimes you have to really pay attention to what that shift is like. I think rarely is it something where it's just you brew it and it's just trash. It's just truly awful.
Well, it's also tricky for
know,
pu'er, because pu'er goes through cycles, right? So it may go through like a cycle, like an adolescent phase, where it just doesn't want to do what you told it to do. You know, it's in its awkward phase. And you know, if somebody was just like, "Oh, my pu'er tea is ruined," well, it might not be. So
had pu'er like that too. I've had the awkward phase where I thought there was something weird with it, and then I came back to it 6 months and a year later, and it had just totally chilled out.
we get
really
weird.
Funny.
You know, so we've got a storage room here. We dedicated one entire room, right? You know, in our home, and I, you know, basically stripped everything out. You know, like pulled out the carpet, pulled out everything, just made it like you know, it's got a cement floor, and you know, I keep a heater and humidifier in there, and kind of work to control stuff, but. Nice. Every now and then, like it's packed like floor to ceiling with all of our tea, and it's on. We use just standard kitchen style, like chromed steel, like kitchen racks, like you'd see in like in an industrial kitchen or something like that. Because I want like airflow to get in and around stuff. But most days you walk in there and it just smells amazing, and then every now and then you'll walk in there and you're like, whoa, like what? which tea decided to like go through some weird stage right now? And you'd be like, some interesting like thing. Let's see, what is Audrey? Adriana says, is a rule of thumb, if you don't like it, don't drink it. That's a pretty decent rule of thumb. Suzette, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, or at least like maybe change the way that you're brewing it a little bit. I think there's a wide scale for if you don't like something, what do you encounter there, right? It could be sharpness or edginess or a flatness or, so to me, signs where it seems like it's strong, like there's an edge to it, I usually take that as a sign of like, I need to play with the brewing a little bit more. If it seems like it's stale, like kind of boxy or dry, to me, that's usually, and for most teas, I think that could be a sign that it's maybe a little bit past its prime. It's fading a bit, So whether or not you drink it, it won't hurt you, but it's probably not going to be that enjoyable at that point. There may not be very much you can do to revive it either, I don't think.
Yeah, I think if Adriana, to add to that, if it's a known tea that everyone else has made really good reviews of, and then for whatever reason you're not being able to get out of it what other people would, then I'd probably like stick with it and try and like adjust your brewing parameters and stuff. But also life's short. You shouldn't have to drink bad tea. And if somebody else is telling you that this tea is amazing and you don't like it, then you know what, stick with what you like. Keep it around for educational purposes, and maybe it'll get better in a little while and stuff. But otherwise, it's and we're to the point like that with our business. I mean, I guess we kind of always have been, but we drink and try so many teas that I can tell relatively quickly within a handful of steeps. It's just like whether I want to continue tasting it for purchase reasons, or whether I'm like, like Lamo and I had some tea like a couple weeks ago. We were both sitting there drinking it, and I'm like, this tea is just not going to go anywhere.
Just not
I'm like,
it.
it's not even worth like going through. And our like official like like tasting for purchase rigor is relatively short anyways, because we're trying to be more efficient about it. But every now and then, I just know like, first steep's like, no, this is not, it's not, this
I'm kind of the same way. Like with if I'm tasting for purchase, if it's a high value tea, I'll kind of put it more through the gong fu of it. But usually, I think you kind of know in those first couple tastes, really, if it's worth the boiling the water to make more.
Right.
Yeah,
definitely. Is it worth the amount of electricity I'm going to have to?
Is it worth the electricity to do that? Now, you did bring up a good point though around educational purposes, which of course, for me, that's something that I definitely perks my ears. I do like collecting teas that have some issues, because it's really helpful for demonstrating. Some things are very hard to find as far as something that's wrong with the tea. And again, like when we say wrong,
right,
not really like harmful wrong. It's not gonna, be a poison control center kind of situation. It's just, it doesn't taste good, very simply, right? But every now and then you encounter something where, like, from the teacher's point of view, you're like, ooh, that's really cool.
No, I do. That's something that we've made a point of as well. Like when I find bad teas that I think are bad enough that they could offer some sort of a lesson, I will specifically keep those teas around. We've not actually gone to the point of selling those teas as educational, and I know some companies do, but we've done. I've got a handful of teas that I'm fairly certain were heavily pesticided, and I keep those away from the other teas, sealed in plastic. And if somebody comes over for a tea tasting, they're like, "Hey, I'd love to taste one of those. I can probably go dig through and try that." Yeah. Or I've got some just some teas that just really just immediately make me feel ill, and I'm like, well, that's a really interesting one. Like I should, like, and I'll keep them around. I'll never drink them again, but like if I needed to, like have something to compare to something else. I'm gonna switch over to the shou pu'er. I'm gonna start steeping that up.
About to add some more water here to my pot.
and I'll be using this little guy here. This is one of a little Gen Shui that we use for.
I love ones that have that little spout, where it's just like, ooh.
It's like boom, just a little nub of spout.
Love
Yeah,
it.
I do too. It's just
It's like my favorite spout design.
Yeah, so that would be a Zisha. Zisha generally kind of does that. Zisha or the dragon's eggs and stuff. Although I will admit, this guy's got a pretty cute little spout too. Even though it's a little bit longer, he's just like he's kind of proud. He's just like he's ready to go, ready to brew tea. In fact, this is actually called half Zisha. That's the specific name for it because it's a Zisha pot that they just like sliced in half. And this is one of our shou pu'er dedicated ones. So, and we're drinking a white label. It's a white label cake I sent you, right? Was it a cake or a brick? I can't remember. It's the same material. We just pressed some of it as a cake and pressed some of it as a brick for whatever reason. This is
just cause
a while ago. I just wanted to have some different options. And what am I gonna do? I'm gonna switch over to a clay cup as well. This is the one that I kind of use more for shou pu'er. This is kind of a fun. This is actually a wood fired one in the one of the Huaning dragon kilns, and it's been through some stuff. It's not a perfect cup, but it's nice.
Those are the best kind, though.
Yeah. Spool String wants to know what your thoughts are on blind buying teas.
Well, I'll share my thoughts, and then I know you have a very different perspective because you're buying for supply and everything like that. So as for me, if I were buying for supply, when I have occasionally projects where I am handling purchasing for somebody, I can't do it blind. I need a sample. I will not do it blind.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm buying just for me, if I know somebody, like going to your website, for example, I've had enough of your teas at this point over the years where I can, by the description, I can tell what I'm going to get out of that. Like I have good faith in your vocabulary and what you're describing, right? So
thank you.
I can definitely do that. Yeah, of course. And so there's a number of different companies, different folks that when people are looking to buy tea, that I point them in that direction. These are folks I've worked with for a long time, either have directly worked with, or like with you, I've just had the teas for a long time. So in that case, yeah, that's fine. But if it's somebody that I do not know, I've never had their teas before, unless it's a really low buy-in and it's something that's kind of experimental, like, picking up some tea from, like the first time that I got tea from the folks at the Renegade Tea Farmers in Georgia, in Europe, I didn't have that before. They didn't have it before either because they were just growing it for the first time.
Yeah.
But their story was so great. I was like, I'm in. Like, I want some of that. So I donated their Indiegogo when they got started, and then their first year after that, when they were making their tea, I bought the whole spring collection sampler kit. I was like, just give me, right? Because it was just so compelling, right? And they had provided so much story and detail, and they also showed the production, and it looked like really good production. It looked like they fully knew what they were doing. So in that case, yeah, like for educational purposes, I'll buy it blind, but otherwise, I'm really iffy about it. I don't love that. I'm much more interested in developing a relationship with the people that I get tea from anyway. I don't like spot buying. I'm never a fan of spot buying where I just pick up something once from someone and then that's it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I think my answer from a consumer level is pretty much the same. I mean, if it's a company that you know and trust, and you've had experience with them, like for example, like when I put my tasting notes down, that you've had other teas from us that had similar tasting notes, and so you probably know what you're going to get. I actually am absolutely pleased with the level of trust that our customers give to us. I mean, a lot of our customers do blind buys of like new teas from us, and that always it just makes me feel kind of proud, I guess, that I've been able to give them a prior experience in the past that made them want to just buy a couple $100 of tea that they never had before. That always makes me makes me feel good. I will never blind buy a tea for anything that we're going to sell on our site. But, you know, I mean, for example, like the Kunlu Small Arbor Tree, the Kunlu Shou tea, like I have bought that tea from the exact same farmers like every single year for 8 years in a row. I will buy it from them. But I also know that like if I try that tea and I don't like it, they'll just take it back and give me the money because like we have that relationship. So it's not as risky. Sometimes if you know I'm working with some farmer and they're like, hey, we've got some of this extra material, you know, it came from, you know, like we found, you know, like, you know, we've been working with this other village over there and they've got this material and wanted to know if like you would be interested in it or something like that. I may put down like an option to purchase it and then have a sample sent to me so that I kind of have like my like name on that tea in the short term until I can actually like try it. And then if I get it and I try it and I like it, then I can continue the purchase. And if I don't, then it's, you know, it all works out. But no, I'll never just like buy some tea and throw it into like some cake and then just shove it on the site and sell it. I just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Jugpan says yes, he trusts my taste, and that's why it's easy to buy blind. Yeah, Jugpan has bought quite a number of our teas. Thank you, man. I appreciate that statement a lot, actually. Yeah. So what can I say about this tea here? I can't remember. Yeah. So we had a bunch of, this is like 2015-ish. We had a bunch of extra material that I didn't have planned to blend or put into an existing product, but I felt the need to press it, I guess, at that point in time. And I think now I would actually probably just keep it and let it age loose for more years until I can get into, you know, like an actual, you know, like Crimson Lotus like product. So we just put simple Nefe on it and wrapped it in simple stuff, and then I just didn't really feel passionate about selling it at that point in time, you know, because I get really passionate about like about the storytelling aspect of teas, you know, like to have like good art and good name and kind of work it all together and kind of give people like a full experience when they actually buy a product from us. And then for these teas here, I was just like, well, you know what, let's just wait. Let's just let them rest for like 5 years on the shelf or whatever it was. And then we started selling it and just had a simple white label on it, so we just called it white label shou pu'er, and it's good stuff. But you know, like there's a huge range of shou pu'er available now. You got, you know, like super low ends. I mean, of like pu'er tea that worthy to be drank, I should say. I don't consider like the not worthy to be drink stuff in the scale, but you know, you got like low end stuff, medium stuff, and high end stuff. And this is a really solid mid range daily drinker shou pu'er. Nothing super fancy, but it's got some it's good stuff. It's nice and nice.
Very refreshing.
Yeah,
has a really lovely. I really enjoy that kind of clean mineral flavor.
Me too.
It's something that just, especially this time of year, like where it's kind of damp outside and, you know, transitioning from warm to cool, and it feels like a very stabilizing quality.
It's definitely like that
springtime teas.
That clear, clean shou pu'er mineral note is one that I always go for. For me, it just it immediately brings me back to a summer camp in the North Georgia mountains. Something about that dry, shale, foresty thing. I just like I drink a tea like that, and it's just like I'm back in summer camp, which I had good memories of that summer camp. So it I kind of like that how tea.
I think it's interesting. Like I get a lot of questions about seasonality when it comes to drinking tea, and
like which tea you should drink in different seasons.
Well, yeah, and actually, it's interesting because I think primarily the framework that someone's using when they ask the question is more like from a culinary perspective. How we learn to talk about our food in that way, you know, like what's in season right now in the spring. Like in Chicago right now, it's asparagus season. We're getting the ramps. We're getting morel mushrooms. Like we have some very specific foods that are growing right now and they're only available right now, and that is primarily the lens that I think a lot of folks approach seasonality from. But then there's this whole, like there's several other sides of that discussion, right? Because there's the seasonality for the tea, right? So when is the tea actually made, but also how
Right.
does it feel throughout the year as it changes in its composition? And then what is your own seasonality? Like, how do you feel, right? How do you
Right.
feel in relation to your environment around you? So regardless as to when this tea material was made, there's something about it that feels very appropriate for this period in spring. It feels very grounding and stabilizing, very earthy in a nice way.
That makes
It has
sense.
nothing to do with like when it's made.
Right.
Sometimes people think that spring teas only means teas that are harvested and made in the spring.
Yeah, the Chinese have very specific ideas about when teas should be drank based on the, I guess, the warming or cooling energy
Exactly.
perspective of the tea. And so
that's a lot how I learn my tea drinking too. Like when I'm
Nice.
teaching, I teach in our program, I call it just energetics, like understanding kind of the energetics of what the tea is offering, and that's how that's aligned. I learned actually a lot about that from my acupuncturist too. He's the one who
Okay.
helped me finally convince myself to give up coffee because it just wasn't working for me. Coffee
Yeah.
is something that is such a, and I started out working in coffee, so I had a very close relationship with it.
Yeah.
But it's a very yang food, right? It's like one of the most yang things that you could have. And I'm a much more yin oriented person. That's my constitution. And so it was overpowering. It was so much for me. And so I learned a lot about those concepts from him, and that was really helpful. So it kind of made me add another layer to how I think about seasonality with tea, not just, oh, it's first flush Darjeeling time or it's Shincha time, it's time for
just because that happens to be what's
silver
on the
needle white
market,
tea.
right?
Right. Like, yeah, like that's one layer, sure. But what do you need right now? And what do you need based on where you live and just your own body constitution and how you feel? And let's align this from a more traditional medicine perspective, because that's, we get this much more holistic point of view of a relationship with tea in that way. And I think that's really special.
I mean, you even mentioned that the teas that you want to drink now aren't the teas that you used to want to drink. So even as we age, we find ourselves, moving into different things. I am starting to find a little bit that I don't want to drink tea as late as I used to want to drink tea, which is interesting because like I've always been a night owl, but now it's just like if I drink tea, then I'm even up even significantly later.
Same. I'm a night owl too.
And like our business is geared around being, interfacing with China, so we're always up late anyways. And so kids go to bed. I mean, even 9 o'clock. Our kids go to bed pretty late, so our kids go to bed at like 9 o'clock, and then that's when I get to sit down and like do work and stuff. And so in the past we'd be doing like tea tastings, be analyzing stuff, but now it's just like, man, it just seems like seems really late. We did some live streams on like the Midnight Tea Club. We did some of that stuff for a while, and that was so much fun because we really got a chance to have tea with people who were, just waking up in Europe and stuff like that. And that was really nice. But those tea sessions just wrecked us like all the way into like all the way into like Sunday morning at noon, because it was always Saturday night midnight tea club, and I was just like, I don't think we can do this anymore. But I used to do that. All the time. So people change.
They do. I mean, that's something that I realized a couple of years ago. I completed a yoga teacher training program. It's a program that's geared towards trauma-informed teaching. And so what I teach primarily is meditation and yoga nidra, and work that in side by side with tea meditation, with how we develop relationship with tea. And the lineage that program based itself on, where you're teaching like the physical yoga, asana, the postures, is a tradition called Vinny Yoga. And Vinny Yoga developed as a way of teaching physical yoga for folks who are going at different stages in their life, right? So part of it could be, you're getting older, but some of it could be, maybe you're working through an injury or a chronic illness, or, you just have different needs than you did when you were, 19.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the idea that, the relationship with yoga should age with you throughout your life, and you evolve and you adapt to that. And the same thing, I really started looking, I found parallels to that with my tea, like how very different my approach is with my tea now compared to 20 years ago.
Right.
And not viewing it as like I'm losing something, right? That I'm not as this, like whatever fill in the blank as I used to be. It's just I'm different. I have a different sensitivity and different appreciation for this area now. which is really cool to see. I like that process of being able to look at it from that point of view rather than feeling, I think typically in our society, we're very geared around towards the process of aging is something that is not so pleasant, and that it means we're losing something as opposed to
it isn't pleasant, but it can be made more pleasant. I think yeah, I started off being much more integrated with, or much more resonating with shou, but then over time we spend so much time when we're in China like drinking day of or week of sheng pu'er that I really started to be like, that's what I tend to like deeply crave year round actually. But no, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is just learning to listen to your body and understand whether the tea is actually appropriate or not. I mean, your body will tell you. But yeah, this tea is a little bit more, definitely a little bit more body warming than the last one.
Yeah, definitely. Really feel it kind of around chest area, lungs, like just facilitating movement.
So how do you teach? How do you describe the concept of tea energy to somebody who doesn't know anything about that?
The way that I teach it, we typically, like in a very beginner class, I'll choose a few teas that are seemingly kind of opposites from each other. There's something about them that is very different. And so that you can see that difference, like visually it looks different, the liquor is different, the smell, the weight of it is different. But when we're tasting it in a very like slow process, really taking our time with each one and just noticing how you feel that in the body, directing the attention to where sensation is arising and what you associate with that sensation, what's immediately happening around that. It could be expansion, it could be contraction, smoothing qualities, it could feel kind of rough or edgy, it could feel warming or cooling, it could feel like it's rising or lowering. Just kind of noticing physically what's happening, and also noticing, what might be happening emotionally. What are some things that come up as you start to pay attention to those different areas. And so just observing that, when we talk about a tea being cooling or warming, has nothing to do with the actual brewed temperature of it.
Right.
Sometimes they'll even serve the tea at the same temperature just purely for the purpose of demonstrating that. Like, it has nothing to do with the serving temperature of it. You still feel that reaction to it. And so being able to do it in a way where it's really personalized for somebody to just observe that. And I often strip away a lot of the other elements of brewing. Like a lot of times we just do it brewing in a bowl or something like that. It's without all the other teaware, just so they could be really direct interaction with the leaf and just getting up close to it, just seeing how simple that can be and how personalized that reaction can be in the body.
Yeah.
And people tend to get that really quickly. So I get into that before, we start talking about all of the, usually I'll have the conversation about seasons and about the season around us, the season of our bodies, the season of the tea. I have that conversation after because I don't want to lead anybody into what to expect. We just actually start with the tasting to just get a sense for what is already there, where are your sensitivities already, and then let's explore some of what happened here and understand a little bit what's going on and where these things converge together to different ideas. It's pretty fun. Like, I think people really enjoy. It's both a way of kind of removing a little bit of the mystery of that. Like when we talk about chi, we talk about prana, right? Removing a little bit of the mystery of what we mean by that, as well as kind of adding a little bit, right? So you like physically experience this thing, sometimes even emotionally, right? People notice like a shift in their thought patterns, right? So you definitely experience it, but you don't know why, and that's okay. Like, the asking the questions is such a big part of that experience. Asking the questions that don't have answers, right? It's the observation. It's not diagnostic. It's just observing, and it's a really different way to approach tea. I think people tend to really enjoy that because it's so different.
I like how you mentioned removing as many variables as you can so that you can get down to a really simple compare and contrast. I mean, I spent a majority of my professional career in, quality software assurance and testing and stuff. And that's that's the absolute, that's what you have to do. I mean, if you can break down everything down to an A/B test, whether it's, a consumer facing A/B test or like an actual software thing, if you have to do that, because if you don't, there's far too many variables. And I found that really helpful in tea as well. If you can try to construct these educational situations where it's just like, okay, we're taking everything out. We've evened the playing field. Like, you're tasting this versus this, and it's highly educational.
Yeah, that's definitely my approach to teaching in general. Is a very, very distilled down, simple, direct lesson. Because I think a lot of times, just again, as someone who education in tea is really just, it's what I've poured my whole working life into. And in my background prior to that, I was a journalist, right? So I was somebody who had a background in research and in storytelling and in gathering and how we communicate, how we can understand the effect of the communication we have on emotion for people, right? The intention of what we're trying to do. To form a connection. And a lot of times in not just tea education, but I think a lot of things that can be very sensory based, tasting, right? It can be overwhelming. Like, somebody will bring dozens of teas to one tasting, right? And so, yes, true, somebody will walk away from that experience being like, wow, that was amazing. We had so many teas. But what will their immediate takeaway that they really remember be, other than just that kind of feeling of just awe, right? What will they remember about how to make tea for themselves, some of the key differences between the teas, how they felt while they were having it, right? The ability that I could replicate that, I can continue my own learning. I know how to shop for teas now, like just little simple takeaways, right? Often the overwhelm prevents that. So I tend to teach in a very like zoomed in kind of way. Because that, when I think about my own education in tea, that was a lot of how it was. Even just like washing dishes that, we were serving tea and was educational for me. Just every little touch point, just seeing patterns was really amazing. It wasn't in this kind of download format, and so that's something that I like to replicate too when I'm teaching. It's just this very stripped down, let's simplify this so that you can actually start to develop a relationship with tea itself. Then we can add in all the other stuff,
Right. No, that's a way to do it, because it's super overwhelming. I'll get to Layla asked a question on what are your thoughts on the Dao of Tea, but I asked her to expound on that a little bit. I think people, I think it's really, really easy for people to get absolutely overwhelmed now that we have like this, relatively new to the West concept of, tea, gong fu, and brewing tea in the gong fu style. And it's at both times absolutely like fascinating and intriguing and really overwhelming and confusing. And so I think, we try to do the same thing. People are like, oh, I need to get this. What clay do I get? What do I do with that? I'm like, what? At the absolute simplest, like if you have a mug and you've got a way to make hot water, like you can start doing tea. And it's an awkward position, of course, like being somebody who sells all these amazing like tools to tell people like, don't buy those things. But I don't want people to buy things unless they know why they're buying it, and when they
just sits on the shelf, they never use it,
and if they've we actually spend a lot of time brewing in our portable Gong Fu to go tea brewer. I actually spend a lot of time doing that. I find that I can have really good sessions with that. And we've had really good sessions with just, simple mug. I mean, nearly every person in China brews tea grandpa style. Statistically, that's probably like if you're looking at absolute like numbers, like how do people in the world brew tea? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be grandpa style.
In a glass.
It's just like in a glass with some leaves. And, but I personally feel that like the Gong Fu style allows you to have like a whole lot of control over like the parameters You get a lot of that. And so once you're at the level where you're looking to pull out every single last little bit of that tea experience, I think Gong Fu is a way to absolutely do it.
Yeah.
Russell wants to know
and I use those two things side by side too, actually. So like, especially in teaching tea meditation and contemplative work, a lot of the times it's in the bowl, which I really started developing because my habit was drinking like grandpa style. That's how I learned so much about tea, was that way. And so I just kind of reframed it in this way of working within a bowl. But, Gong Fu for me has its place, especially when you need something to kind of guide you a bit more. It can be helpful when you're feeling maybe a little bit anxious or wound up, right? You need something physical to engage with and to focus on. I often recommend Gong Fu for that, if you're using that as your meditative experience.
Well, that's where the ritual aspect of it aspect of it comes in, and that's how I made tea without really knowing it. Like I found that I was making tea. A coffee when I was doing coffee. That's how I found that I was making coffee. Is it became very, very ritualistic. Like I made sure the water was just right and had this many. I would even weigh out my water. I was just like being very. And it would take me half an hour to make a cup of coffee. It was really frustrating when friends would come over. I'm like, hey, you want a cup of coffee? And they're like, sure. And then a half an hour later, I'm still working. And they're like, dude, when's like, just wait. It'll come. It'll be really good.
Don't go to Ethiopia and ask for a cup of coffee, because they're going to roast the beans in front of you. Then they're going to grind it. And that's the way to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that was it. Like
experience.
If you want to have that, what I realized was that like in the West, we really don't have nearly anything that we do ritualistically, like as a culture, right? And I learned early on, even before I was into tea, that was, I think humans crave something like that, and we didn't. If you don't find that, you don't know that you're actually missing out on something. And so, as soon as like the first time I saw Gong Fu, like I immediately got it. I'm like, sure, great, I totally get it. This is the way I've been doing coffee. Like I can have this same like ritualistic experience. So I asked Layla to expound on her questions on the Dao of Tea, but maybe she didn't see that. So what are your thoughts on the Dao of Tea, which is her question?
Yeah, my understanding, kind of studying a lot of, I like to put different texts and theories and teachings in conversation with each other. I see a lot of similarities between, for example, tea as it's been taught through different histories in East Asia, with how we see, for example, like yoga as it's taught in South Asia. A lot of these same ideas around harmony between self and the world around us, and the idea of practice as a means of, at the same time, getting in touch with self and also going beyond self, getting to the point where we are realizing non-duality of an experience, right? Which is, non-duality is just, it's even something that you can understand intellectually, but you still have a hard time wrapping yourself around, because we live in a world that has a very specific reality, right? Like we need, for example, a certain amount of money, all of us, financially, to pay bills, to have a roof over our head, right?
Yeah.
We have to have a job that provides money. We, have structures around us that mirror that with, schooling and commerce and everything like that. We don't get the option to just check out of that, even though we might understand easily, we're all connected. Yeah, we're all connected. We're all one. We're all part of the same thing, right? Yeah. So these teachings ask us to be able to put those two things in conversation with each other, to understand how can we accept the connected nature of everything, while also allowing that to help us make peace with our reality of being in a world where we might feel very unconnected. We might feel very separate and removed from different things, right? And it's very difficult to do. And so I for me, tea has been one of the biggest teachers of that, is being able to see, even just on simple little metaphor, right? Like I think tea is such a great teacher of big concepts on a micro level, right? That everything it comes from this lineage of plant that all of the tea types are part of a spectrum. They're actually not in these clean and neat little boxes. Like this is only white tea. This is only green tea, right?
Yeah.
It's a spectrum. And, and so many different things go into the creation of that. Its own global history is tied with so many other elements of other people's history, right? So tea teaches us this connected nature of things, this oneness, right? Especially when you engage in systems of learning that are the way that tea traditionally has been taught, which is nonlinear, it's experiential, it's living it, it is tasting it and drinking it day in and day out, and having a connection with the tea and the land where it came from, a connection with the tea, the people that make the tea, really feeling like it's part of you. It's not an object. That for me is like when you start to realize that tea is not an object, right? That it's a person, right? In indigenous teaching, we would say tea is a person, right? That is when that relationship for you really starts to develop, right? And we can use this as a means of understanding our place in the world better and our relationship with people better, human people better, animal people better. So for me, a lot of these philosophies, as I started looking into them, really kind of overlap and speak to very similar concepts.
I like that you can go as deep as you want or not in tea.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a tea bag in hot water in the morning to get your day started, tea can do that for you. But if you want to go as deep as you want to go into it, I'm fascinated with the idea that you're drinking the earth, this is, but you're drinking the earth as interpreted by a tea tree. Like, I just the idea of that, these.
It's very cool.
I saw there was I think I've mentioned this on other streams or something. People are probably like, why do you always talk about this? I don't know, but I was watching a documentary on wine, and in the documentary on wine, the guy had built his wine cellar directly beneath where they actually grow the plants, right? Where they actually grow the vines. And he had constructed it in such a way where you could see how far down the roots had actually gone from the trees up there. And you could see them actually reaching out their tendrils into the minerals of the soil. And as it was like moist down there, and you could literally see like where that wine started, like at the root level with the minerals being pulled up. I thought that was super cool.
Super cool.
And it's absolutely the same way with pu'er tea.
Yes.
That's why you like old tree stuff, is because those old trees are digging down like really, really, really deep. And it's those are the roots you need. You need the roots that go down. You don't want like the terrace stuff where the roots are going sideways and things. Layla said she's currently studying the book of Tea Medicine by Wuda and finds herself more curious about the spiritual benefits of tea as great connector to the heart, mind, body, and community of nature. If she answered your question, Layla, that would be great. If not, you could ask it in a different way. But my friend Ziaxio jumped in. He's like, "Did somebody say minerals?" Ziaxio is a mineral studies student in Montana, and he and I have conversations about tea and minerals and stuff all the time. Yunnan's fascinating because we really only think about like what happens on the ground level at Yunnan, but like you go like under the ground in Yunnan, and there's like crazy amounts of cool like minerals, and it's this constant kind of like contrast at an industrial level in China, because China has a massive industrial machine that works to keep themselves in economic power and to balance the need for accessing what's under the ground versus what's above the ground is goes back and forth a lot in Yunnan specifically, because Yunnan still is relatively untouched. But as like pollution and everything that comes with like the big industrial scale machine is having stronger effects on other places in China, well, they don't want that anymore. And so now they're looking over towards Yunnan. It's like, well, Yunnan's great. We're just going to set up all of our like big stinky industrial machines over here and start like, like pouring through the ground. It's, they go back and forth. They go back and forth on that a lot. But Yunnan's a very, very rich environment. You get the Himalaya mountains, which are right there, so every time it like rains and snows, all that minerals just get pulled down off of those mountains slowly over time. It goes into the big rivers, and the river brings it down and does everything. So it's a big, huge connected thing. But yeah, Xiaxio and I like to talk about minerals and mining and stuff like that. So glad to see you in here, Xiaxio. What's going on? So you talked a little bit about the storytelling aspect of tea. What intrigues you about the storytelling aspect of tea, or how do you see that manifest with tea?
I think, one of the things I really enjoy watching for people is how it helps them connect with their own origin story.
Okay.
It allows them space to question their own origin story, what leads them here, who they are now, where they might go, what they might become. And so rather than studying tea from a perspective of memorizing facts, memorizing places, and just things that are kind of static, things that they may not have that kind of life to them, figuring out how we can bring life to that, right? So inviting that as, connection for ourselves. So considering, how do we feel about something when we drink it, and we, are smelling it, and we're exploring it? What comes to mind for us? Like that, really potent connection between what we smell and our memory, that are the part of our brain that processes aroma and assigns names and descriptions to what we smell is the same part of our brain, one of the parts of our brain that's associated with memory, right? So that's why for a lot of folks, when you smell something, people say it reminds me of this, and that might actually be, it could be a food or a flower or something like that. It can also be a place, it could be a time in their life, it could be a person, and so that's a very deliberate and intentional connection. And so inviting that into the tea learning space, the tea storytelling space, as a means of inspiring people to want to learn more about where their tea comes from, the people who make it, potentially maybe even visit those places someday, so that connection is very embodied. It's not something that is external of you, like we were just talking about before, the idea of that, when tea goes beyond being something that is an object to you, like this tea in front of me is separate from me, right? But when we get to where we're one and the same, that this is how I'm brewing it and how it is right now is a representation of what's going on inside for me, right? So my thoughts and my, mannerisms and my emotions are reflected in my brewing, right? And so when I'm drinking the tea and having that come full circle back, I see how I am in this present moment while I'm drinking this tea. And so it's an opportunity for me to continue learning, continue growing that way. When we start to see tea as that, then the ways that we go about learning it in the world become much more embodied, they become much more memorable. So that, if we do have that experience to go to Yunnan, to go hug a tea tree. Oh my gosh, I remember the first time I got to hug a tea tree, and it was like coming home. It was like, I remember you, I know you already. It wasn't taking selfies in front of it and like this touristy kind of thing. That has its value, sure, but it could be so much more than that. And so for me, like, that's the storytelling. When we invite ourselves to be participants in the story, I think that we can have so much more of a powerful connection with it. And ultimately, what's the purpose of that? That is that we can feel part of the responsibility for carrying this on, right? Like we're the lineage holders for this. We're the people that protect tea and that are bringing it into the future. Yeah. We're in the process also of, when we do this, actively correcting past harm, actively working to reduce harm that was done in the past and make amends, right? So we are working both in the past, in the present, and in the future when we do this work. So for me, storytelling is, it's really potent medicine in that way.
So yeah, you've been doing this, you said almost 20 years now, right? It's it's getting close to that. How have you seen education of tea in the last 2 decades? I mean, has it gotten easier to educate about tea? Are people more receptive to learning about tea? Was it harder in the beginning? What have been some of the challenges, and what have you seen over that?
Yeah, I think in general, people are more informed. They've at least heard of some things up front. They're more familiar with some terms. And on the other side, though, one of the challenges that I notice is it's not just that there's misinformation out there, it's just that there's very old information too.
Yeah.
You know, once something's out there, it's really hard to take it back. Like I still have people asking about, can you rinse caffeine off the tea?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, like that was disproven in like the 80s. And we are still answering that question. It's very hard to take some things back, which also makes you very aware of some of the things that you say as an educator, to be very like specific with your words. So there's just a lot of, you know, kind of course correcting and gently pulling back that curtain. You know, still a lot of folks who think that white tea has no caffeine, for example, or just lots of stuff. So, but people are more informed going into it, I think, which is nice. Some of the questions I get are what I would say like bigger questions now, which is nice. I think it's reaching more people now.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find really fascinating actually is when working with people who are already very immersed in tea as a hobby, tea as a personal passion, on the tasting side of things, tasting and collecting and studying and all that. When some of those folks are interested in pursuing, learning a little more about tea as a personal practice, right? Tea is contemplative. Sometimes that's very hard work for them because they're so used to the analytical thinking of the tea, right?
True.
They cannot stop making the tasting notes in their head.
Yeah.
And I've heard folks say that, like, all I want to do is just analyze this tea. It's really hard for me to sit with it. Versus when tasting with people who might be very kind of technically new to tea, you know, people like who do yoga or meditation or practice martial arts or some other kind of contemplative thing. But the idea of sitting with yourself and exploring comes very natural. And so even though the tea part is new, the mind body part is very receptive, you know. And so that's really fascinating because I think sometimes there's this idea that you have to know a whole lot about tea in order to approach it from a contemplative point of view. Not really, you just have to be receptive.
And I actually find, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's hard sometimes. The reason why that I really feel at this point in my life now that that's so important is because it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
You know, I am somebody who spent over the first 10 years of my time in tea teaching from a very analytical point of view.
Yeah.
Right. Like everything was about like cupping and evaluation and like very, very technical stuff with tea, chemistry of tea, you know, all of this. And yet in my own personal life, I had this contemplative work with tea, right? You know, for a number of years, like I was a student of Yu. I also had other aspects of my life that were contemplative, like my yoga and movement therapy studies and philosophy. I studied Buddhism. Like I had these other things that were very contemplative for me. And I kind of felt like there were two different identities for me. I felt there was like my professional industry side that was on my resume. And then I had like, well, here's who I am. And that kind of duality thinking, especially as you start to study the idea of duality versus non-dual, really started to mess me up. And so in working to bring these things together so that they are actually part of the same conversation, really made a big difference for me in my whole relationship with tea. And so I do think it's important to invite that in, but it's hard when you have spent so much of your time on the analytical side of tea and not on the more emotional connection side. Like, why are you actually really here?
That's a tricky thing.
This that brings you here?
Because I mean, you explained that it took you 10 years to kind of move from analytical into emotional, and at least in the West, I mean, we have to analyze everything. I mean, everything, and that's the way every single connoisseur level thing has been taught to us. Like, what does the wine taste like? What does the coffee taste like? What does the food taste like? And analyzing and taking things and putting things in boxes. You know, like, oh, this wine tastes like this. This is I've had this thing. I've now experienced that. So now I know what all tea from that mountain tastes like. It's like, well, and that's the way I apprached it when we went to Yunnan.
This experience is done. I have acquired this experience.
It's we don't specifically gamify things in the West, but like we do definitely approach life as a game in the West.
Yes, we do. There
is a bird in my house. Lama, there's a bird in the house.
Oh!
Look at that. Look at that. It's okay, buddy. He's coming into the tea tasting. He's literally right here. Oh, buddy, that's a window.
Come on, buddy.
Lama, you got to stand over there to let him get out.
Here.
He's gone.
Sit right here.
Yeah, no, he was literally like right there. We've got a big, huge window right here, so he was trying to get out, but bird emergency is over. Like I was saying, I certainly approached Yunnan that way. It was just like, okay, like, you know, like I'm here to learn everything I can about tea. Like that's my progress. Is, you know, like put these in boxes. I've had this, I've had that, I've had that, and then very quickly realizing that like that approach just didn't work. But it kind of sometimes put us at odds with some of the Western pu'er customers who had head teas that were described in a certain way, or head teas, you know, like from a specific mountain. And they're like, well, I've had Boolong, so now Boolongs all taste like that. And then we sell a tea from Boolong. And then they're like, well, clearly Crimson Lotus tea doesn't know what they're doing because, you know, like this tea doesn't taste like Boolong, and I've had 10 Boolong teas. And so I think it's definitely gotten a little bit easier over the years. I like that, like in the beginning, I mean, we were super active on Reddit and RT and our pu'er and like asking questions and engaging in conversation and stuff. I don't really have to do that much anymore. Like every single other person, like they know the right answers. So I'm seeing a lot of like community education as well, which is great because it makes our job like a little bit easier. I can focus on doing different things, and I don't have to focus as much on education, which is great, which definitely helps.
I love this this thing that you mentioned too about the idea of, oh, I've had tea from this area, and so I know what they all taste like now. And you know, when I started in the industry, I started working for a company that, you know, was both a coffee and a tea importer. So I learned coffee and tea side by side. And when I think back on how both tea and coffee were presented then, and this was the way for, you know, within a specialty coffee sphere too, just as a whole, like you would have on a menu Costa Rica, Colombia, Guatemala, as if this one representation of that's what it was. And that's how we taught that, right? Costa Rica coffees are like this, Kenya coffees are like this, and that was like that for a very long time until we started to feel more of having the language of being able to break that down. And absolutely, like that's how my own thinking was. I thought of things in this very kind of specific view, and it took a long time to accept variety and unpredictability and just the nature of it, honestly, to just let it be what it wants to be and to just accept the experience of what it is.
The trick
that took some unlearning.
Yeah, it does. The trick as a vendor is needing to provide a product to both audiences. So because I recognized that early on that I wanted to be a part of the product, and so I wanted to be able to input my creativity into the naming and the wrapping and specifically the blending, and I wanted to be able to take the interesting materials that I found and put them into a product. But also at the same time, like I couldn't just do that. We also had to have like, this is from this specific area and this mountain. And so we can have things for both customers. You know, like if you specifically want to seek those things out, I have those teas for you. But at the same time, if you want to have more of an experiential relationship with it, you can have, you know, like some of the Crimson Lotus tea branded story-based cakes. I really feel like just the storytelling aspect of it.
I super appreciate that you do that too.
Thank you.
I think that's really important.
I mean, because that's, you know, like growing up in the coffee world, once I found, you know, single origin bean experiences, like that just tickled my nerd brain. I just loved it. And I would go to coffee tastings all around Seattle, all the different shops and stuff like that. And, you know, like if anybody had, you know, like single origin espresso, like done, like, you know, sign me up. Right. And, I loved those experiences, and I know that there's other people that like those experiences, and maybe they're at the first of their decade-long journey to go from putting things in boxes to, you know, like finding the, you know, like the emotional connection to tea. And you can't just force somebody like, no, you're wrong, go over here and do this. You have to construct it.
It's your own journey.
But we also like, I mean, I love the educational aspect of it. You know, just like you love teaching. I love teaching, so we have. Anytime I find something really interesting that it has educational value, we try to make that into a product. Like we've got we have a shou pu'er and a shung pu'er from the same same source, right? So we specifically worked to save aside a certain portion of the tea before it was made into shou, and we
saw that one.
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's
I'm going to get that set. That's
yeah,
cool.
it's really cool. It's really educational, and we had to find specific. Sometimes like the best shou doesn't actually come from the best shung pu'er. Sometimes shung pu'er should be left as shung pu'er. It doesn't. And there's some. It's just really interesting how that works. And the people who run the wet pile fermentation stuff in Yunnan, they're pretty good about knowing what teas are going to work well as shou, and we've had some shou that came from really good shung, and I'm like, you know what, you probably should have left this as shung, because the shou just didn't really do a lot. But yeah, so it was interesting to find a really good material that would actually do that, because we had to have a shung that had a strong enough character that it actually would last through the wet pile fermentation, because that thing's just like the great not randomizer, but it's the great equalizer. It takes everything and just puts it into like a flat thing. That flat thing can be good, or it could be better, it could be worse. But so yeah, that one's a really interesting one. Or I don't know. I find those things really interesting. What else did we do?
I like your elemental set. I just picked that up from you. I think one, it's such a really endearing way of presenting that.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to cupping through that. It's experiences like that when folks are looking for what I like to call shopping for education.
Yeah.
Like specifically what to get and why. It's sets like that, really, because I feel like those are those little learning nuggets that you get, as long as you're viewing them as the beginning of something and not as like, this is the ultimate, like this is the only time that you get to do this. It's like the realization that came to me years ago when I first started really having this inkling of understanding that learning and education comes in cycles, is when I realized, and this is when I started getting more into some work that myself was involved in sourcing and seeing that transition of something from sample on the cupping table to finished product and everything like that, was realizing that, let's say if you are cupping first flush Darjeeling that arrives this year, right? And let's say that you have been a tea buyer for 10 years. Okay, well, so this is a tea that is made just once a year. You get that brief, intense, like a couple week period where the samples arrive and it's like a mad buying rush to get them before everybody else does, right? All work stops in the tea office when the first flush Darjeelings and the Himalayan teas arrive, because they were some of the most competitive teas, right? So if you've been cupping and buying this tea for 10 years, that's just 10 cycles that you have seen.
Yeah.
Of that, and that's not very much.
No,
it's really not. Now, granted, there's a lot of learning in between. They're seeing, okay, this one that has a really strong character right now is going to age better over the course of the next 6 months or a year compared to this one, which is really soft and lovely and fruity and probably better for drinking right now, but I shouldn't buy too much of it because it just won't last, right? There's learnings in between, sure, but you only get to do that part. You've only done that 10 times. That's not a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And so like this stuff comes in cycles. This is why we can't think of it as just, oh, I know this now because I've had this one tasting set. It's like, no, that's the beginning of your understanding of this.
Yeah. And I think that's where it really helps to work with other people and learn from other people who have done that. I mean, I will never be able to sell one of our teas that has been aged for 60 years. That's just the reality of it. Like, I mean, I mean, maybe if I'm really lucky, I'm going to be alive and selling tea when I'm 95. But the reality is, like, it's just not going to happen. That's the reality of it. So, I have to work with other people who have been in the pu'er tea industry since the 70s and 80s, who can talk to me about what the tea experiences they had with those teas were at that time, and they can maybe show me an example of a tea similar to the ones that we're making now that might have the potential for aging and stuff like that. But even for them, like, they had to learn that for 30 years, and they probably learned it from other people, and so it's actually really kind of humbling in a way, and it helps me. I have to I'm a type of person that really wants to control all the minutia. I like to I really stress about having quality, and to just kind of have to let it go is really
that's an important lesson for I think any Westerner also
really
too. Like we're like our whole structure of how we're taught what process and success and achievement looks like is so specific. It is a continual unlearning. You know, it's such a work. And so having things like that require you to interface with other people who have something really of value to teach you is an excellent way of doing that.
So from the pu'er tea perspective, I put as much quality and focus into the tea as I can, and then I just have to let time decide whether that's going to be a well-aged tea or not. And that's it's a little tough. It's a little tough for me. So
I could see that. Yeah.
And there's also this interesting conversation about whether young pu'er tea is supposed to taste good, and if a young pu'er tea does taste good, that's an indicator that it's not going to age well.
I've heard that. I've heard that too. Yeah. Like I don't think it's so black and white like that, right?
My real concern as a vendor is this idea that I would tell somebody to buy a tea that doesn't taste good because it's going to taste good in 40 years. Like there's just that much level of potential for shadiness that I want to at least sell something that you could drink it now and ascertain that it was made with quality from quality material, and maybe it will turn into something super amazing. But at least you've got something that is nice to drink now.
I agree. Yeah, I'm not a and even more so now than than when I first started in tea. Like I don't really play by rules anymore. I think rules inform. I think boundaries inform. Right. Like I do use a scale for measuring my tea. Right. Yeah. I didn't bring it over to the table today, but normally it's right over there. Right. So I do like to play with boundaries as a means to inform what I'm doing, but I don't think that that's a hard and fast rule, because the more time that I've spent with tea, I've just realized it just doesn't work that way. You have to be willing to see flexibility in that. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can teach people in our educational work too, is to not work in systems like that. And if you find yourself dealing with a vendor like that, or in an educational system that is like that, sit with that and question that, and just, really, like, is that for you? How is that serving you? Yeah. Is it helpful in some way? It doesn't mean that it may have no help, but it may not be the ultimate thing that you're maybe putting all your eggs in the basket for.
Yeah, we learned early on that there's no absolute truth in pu'er. There just isn't. There is you can take everything that pu'er is and compare it to another tea, and then add that extra multiplication variable of aging it over time, and it adds so much. It adds an order of magnitude of complexity to what may be easier to understand in other teas in single harvest type situations. And so we learned early on that any vendor that I was working with in China who gave me absolutes, I knew that they didn't know what they were talking about. And but it's funny because, like, I went there looking for absolutes. I want to know the absolutes, and there's no absolute truth in
there's
pu'er.
None.
It's just there's just plenty of.
And I think you can that could be either very freeing for you, or it could be something that drives you nuts. And it's your choice. It's your choice how you respond to that and feel about that. I think for some people, I've encountered folks where that kind of drives them nuts. And for me, that was something that felt really reassuring, because especially after spending such a significant part of my life in a systems where things needed to look a certain way, it was really nice to finally be like, no, this doesn't need to be that.
It's still, there's definitely the part of me that it drives me nuts. There's definitely the part of me that wants to see things organized and categorized, but I'm learning.
Yeah.
It's what you gotta
it's
do.
A process too, because that's again that idea of the non-duality, right? We are still in a world and in a current moment that that does require us sometimes to give yes or no answers to things.
And it's
Right.
it's tricky because there's this balance that we have to do as a vendor between presenting the reality of Yunnan and tea production and Yunnan balanced against what the customer is expecting that to be. And
Sure.
there are a lot of really hard realities about the tea industry in Yunnan that our customers just don't want to know. And you know, trying to show that in an educational way, and also not letting them lose the image that they have of where the tea comes from.
The magic of it.
Because that's once you see how the magic's done, sometimes it loses a little bit of that mystery. So we try to do both.
And having the ability to have those things in conversation with each other. I think there has to be a when I say maturity, I don't mean to imply that somebody's immature in their tea drinking or their childish or whatever, but there does have to be a certain level of maturity for you to handle seeing and knowing some things and not have it ruin the overall for you, right? That's messy stuff. And that's, the same thing happens in a lot of other fields too, like people who go into, like I mentioned before, I did this yoga teacher training. I had searched for like 10 years to find a yoga teacher training that would align with the work that I do and, both personally and professionally. And I found it in this one program that was, one of the first of its kind in the US. When you see behind the curtain of that, of something that is your personal and, what you do, and you see how it's made and you see the structures that exist in the lineage, the messiness of all of it. And then you get to like, here you go, here's what you're going to do with it. Right. You have to be ready for that and to handle it and to not have it just kind of ruin everything for you. And that's difficult. And of course, as a vendor, you can't be the one that decides that for somebody, right? Like they're either at that point or they're not,
I really like how tea can actually be a safe space for people.
Yes. That's how I think of it too.
And so it's a balance between like I want people to have that because it is incredibly therapeutic, and having to understand that I sometimes need to let them continue to have some misconceptions so that the tea experience continues to be safe and therapeutic, and not necessarily worrying about focusing on like I have to show exactly how everything is done, and letting people have a little bit of that mystery is I find it's an interesting balance as a vendor, especially as a vendor who really wants to just show everything. Like I want to show exactly how it's done. It's just an interesting thing that we have to consider. But
I think that's a really I think about that a lot too as an educator. It's a discussion I've had with other folks too, people who are authors or teachers that, sometimes we do leave some details out, and it's not to be misleading. It's because that's what education is. Education is not a dump of everything all at once, like we were talking about earlier. It is seeing those little kernels and allowing that to become circles and spirals that loop around. And maybe it may take you like several years before something comes back around that other time and you're like, oh, I remember this. Now I get it more. The first time I got that, I didn't get it, but now I do, right? And so you're introducing that little bit of messiness to people, but you don't want it to be overwhelming. And so you selectively choose what to introduce when, in a skillful way, in a way not to be misleading, but is to prepare people to be able to handle the whole of the experience, right? And I think that's important work for educators to do that sometimes I think doesn't get fully acknowledged. Like that's why we do it. It's not to be like people could look at how I teach and specifically what I teach maybe as being very simplistic. Like if somebody wants to come to me as like, could you offer a pu'er class for us, talk about the different tea mountains and tasting different vintages? I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to put you in touch with Crimson Lotus because I'm not a tea maker and I'm not a tea vendor, right? I don't have that relationship. But it doesn't mean that I don't know some of those things and I don't live in that reality. It's just I'm not that teacher. I'm this teacher, right? And I teach in this kind of specific way because understanding that selectivity of specific parts of someone's educational experience really grab onto you as a teacher. And I like those kind of transformational, it's foundational elements. It's what you build on top of, right?
Yeah.
All of that knowledge about how pu'er is made, it doesn't do you any good if you don't have a real sense of being able to explore your brewing and why, and to smell and touch and taste things and really like feel it.
Yeah.
All this other stuff is just trivia for you. It doesn't matter. You know?
Yeah, we had to. I mean, early on, I recognized that. I mean, well, pu'er tea was like the first tea that really just absolutely did it for me, and I knew that the world of tea, I mean, including all like the geographical world of tea, is so big. We just made the business decision that we were only ever going to sell pu'er tea, because that's like, I wanted to be able to, you know, Yunnan's where Lamu's from, and I can sit down and we can be there, and I can be a part of it. We have started branching into a Yunnan Dianhong, you know.
I saw that.
And so we are going to have some black tea cakes this year, which I'm very excited about. But it still kind of, for me, is that local focus. But if anybody has any questions in chat, we're just past the 2-hour mark. But I'm sure if anybody had any little extra questions and stuff for Suzette on tea or tea education, or toss them in and we'll get them answered. And so, Suzette, tell people how they find out more information about you or what you do.
Well, we got the nice little tag here on the screen at Being Tea. That's how you can find me on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm more of a lurker on Twitter, I will admit. I don't.
Me too. I've got it set up to auto forward, but
read. Yeah,
Twitter's,
like I just read stuff.
Twitter's a minefield. And it can be really risky. So unless you really know what you're doing, I lurk on Twitter. I do the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm on Instagram. My website is beingtea.com, and primarily, so you know, my education interfaces with both folks who work in the trade, who work professionally, as well as anybody who's not in the trade. So like if you're a tea lover or enthusiast, is very open for you. And I learned really early on in my teaching to be able to have the value of having language that fits both situations, right? So if I'm teaching to a group of professionals, a lot of my language is the same that I would use if I'm teaching to folks who are not working in tea, because the folks who are working in it, chances are they're also sharing and explaining things to their customers, right? So they need to use the same kind of approach and same language anyway. So that's why, you know, for me, it's all kind of one and the same, is how I teach. I mentioned before, I have a teacher training program. It's a 7-month program for people who have a good amount of tea knowledge, and they see education as something that they would like to explore more. That could be professionally, it could be personally. I don't require like someone to have owned a tea business or have passed any certifications or any nonsense like that. Like just have a good base that you're working with, right? Like you have some years in tea, you have some familiarity, because this program deals entirely with how you teach. I don't teach people about tea in this program. I teach you how to teach, right? So we look at adult learning theory, we look at lesson planning, we look at structures of tastings, like timing, we look at audiences you might teach with. We have a whole, like a big root of the program is trauma-informed teaching. So it's learning how to work with different populations and different needs. So just learning how to be more compassionate and considerate educators with tea as our platform of how we do that. And then one of the other main programs I offer is a membership program where people could take tea classes with me all the time. So I teach.
Nice.
Yeah, I teach classes usually twice a week, 2 or 3 times a week, live classes, also recorded classes. There's over 100 recorded classes in the library so far. So
wow,
you can
that's
watch
super cool.
Anytime. Yeah. And so that program is $10 a month, includes all the classes.
Layla just mentioned in chat that she signed up for your summer school. They're looking forward to that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So summer school is something we're doing in June over a weekend where, you know, you'll find in my program, everything is a blend of, like I said, you know, interactive, sensory, kind of exploratory tea brewing and tea exploration, as well as tea contemplative. So we have meditation practices with tea and exploring what it's like to just kind of develop that relationship with tea side by side with the intellectual. The whole program is like that.
Have you found there being an interest from educators who aren't in the tea sphere, wanting to learn how to bring tea into their educational perspective. That's really cool.
I would say like, oh geez, maybe a third of the folks in the program are people who are not from tea as their primary trade, but they have explored tea to an extent. Like I have one of our graduates is somebody who graduated from World Tea Academy, for example, right? As like their first level like tea specialist. So it's somebody who has been to World Tea Expo and taken classes and such, but their primary is in a different field, right?
Yeah.
And that for me, so let me back up, I guess, a little bit about teacher training. When I used to work for tea companies, train the trainer type programs were something that I developed for primarily teaching staff to be more comfortable with educating other staff or wholesale customers or something like that. So I really love the process of teaching teachers and really caring about and investing in like, what does it mean to be an educator? Not like a salesperson, an educator, right? And so this is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And when I did my yoga teacher training, because of the format of the purpose of that program, which was trauma-informed teaching and psychologically sensitive teaching integrated with the healthcare industry, over half of our cohort were people who were not primarily there to teach physical yoga. They were there to learn how to integrate some of that stuff in their existing work. So we had therapists, we had social workers. I'm a tea educator. I don't teach physical yoga classes. I integrate the philosophy into my tea meditation work, right? So that kind of interdisciplinary learning I found really helpful. And over the years, it's been really helpful for me to learn from other industries and other fields. And so, yeah, like my program fully welcomes people who are not like tea professionals by trade. As long as you have a solid tea background and you see offering classes or education about tea as part of where you want to go, you're very welcome in this space. And the reason why I say people need a certain base of tea is that's what you teach from.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're just barely starting in tea, like you had your first 101 a month ago or something, not the program for you, because you're just not going to really have that much you can teach from. Right. But
Layla says that they teach elementary age students and do tea sessions with them, and they love both each other. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, that's how you grow.
Kind of thing.
That's how you grow more of a Western social appreciation of tea as well, as starting with kids. That's really cool. And kids love this. I mean, Gemma's got her own little tea set, and she does little stuff.
Yeah, like branching out into seeing how tea fits into so many other areas of our life.
Yeah.
And what I love about the program is that because those folks are learning and studying together side by side.
Yeah.
For the folks who are coming at this from tea as a trade, right? Maybe they work for a tea company, they have their own tea business, right? They're oriented to one segment, and they get to study and work with people who are from a different segment side by side. So they inform each other, right? We're learning together so that we can have this much more inclusive way of thinking about what tea education is, right? Because it's not solely just about a certification program or a training program for staff, and that's it. It's so much more.
Right.
It's so much more, and it looks like different things for a lot of different people, right? So, but creating that kind of supportive community where we can do that work together, I think it's just super cool. It's the exact thing that I wish I would have had when I started at Tea.
Yeah. No, I think people have a lot more resources available to them now, significantly more than specifically when you started, but even when we started, 7 or 8 years ago, people already have a lot of the vocabulary, and they understand, like more about. I mean, even if I'm specifically talking about just about pu'er tea, I don't have to do as much education anymore. Like people know, they know what to expect, and they know what to ask for, and they know what they want even before me having to have that conversation. Like they've had enough experience with that, and that certainly shows that tea educators like yourself have helped pave that road to make it a lot more easier for people like us to kind of come in, because people they already know. So certainly appreciate you for that.
Yeah, like we were talking before about with the Northwest Tea Festival, like having spaces like that where you have so many wonderful vendors and educators who create this experience where people can come together and have, like these little slices of tea experience, right? In one weekend. And it's such a rich environment.
Yeah.
And has evolved so much over the years. Like I mentioned before, that's one of the first places that if somebody can travel and they're interested to just kind of have this deep dive, I'm like, go to that show, because there's so many great people you're going to meet and learn from. And you can't take it all in one weekend and just learn it all and think that, okay, I'm a tea expert now, but it gives you an idea of what there is to explore what's possible and to get up close to it.
Right. That's awesome. This has been a lot of fun. We've taken up a lot of your Sunday afternoon, and I do appreciate your willingness to spend some time with us and talk about tea and tea things. And
thank you for the invitation.
Of course,
this is so lovely.
Yeah, no, it was fun, and I don't think you and I've actually had the chance to really sit down and have tea like this, because
you're always so busy. You always have like the flock at the booth, and I'm like, I can't sit down.
Yeah, the booth is busy, or like, and you've got your classes and stuff that you teach, and usually like the days before the festival and after the festival, I'm also still like super slammed, and after the festival, like that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, like it's the last thing I want to do is sit down and brew more tea. I get a little teed out at this festival. It's like,
I need a little retreat time. Like I'm also an introverted person, and so like it takes a lot of energy for me to do this. And so afterwards, I'm just like,
I kind of am as well. I mean, I can flip it on when I need to, but honestly, like this whole COVID thing has been really nice. Like I kind of really like not having to. I'm a homebody. I like to stay home, and I like to work on my projects and things like that. And so the idea that society is going to reopen, and I will be expected to do more social things out. It's going to take a little getting used to. We'll get there.
It's really helped me see some ways about how I was working before that just weren't really sustainable, and I kind of think I knew that.
Yeah.
But it really took this situation to realize, there needed to be a shift in how I was working and what I was doing, because it was just way too, like we were talking earlier, way too much way too much like out there, external, needed more of the kind of quiet work piece.
Well, I mean, we've got to find whatever positives we can from this, and it's good that people have been able to find some positives. I like the idea that, technologically we have the capacity, we've proved it, for people to work much more from home, and these businesses to still be relatively successful. We no longer have to shove everybody into little boxes with cubicles inside of a large city if they don't really want it. So, and obviously the capacity for online education is we're there. Like, if you want to do as much education as you want and do it entirely online, it's possible, and it works. And like there's like pros and cons, but it's awesome that we are there. Cool. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the chance to sit down and have some tea with you, because I just haven't had a chance to do that before, and I'm glad that we had some people come on and have some tea with us, and they had some good conversation, some good questions. This was great. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch it. I hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. The weekend's almost done, so I hope you have a good rest of the weekend and a next week. Thank you so much.